day, everyone. Before we start, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Jenny Angela Eusebio, and I, together with my group mates, Ivy Joy Femres, Isa Femela Fortuna, and John Mark Gaston, are going to report and discuss the last lesson for this chapter, which is the evolution of the Philippine taxation. So, here are the learning objectives. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to first identify the different reform and policies of taxation across the years. Second, create a timeline of the evolution of of taxation in the Philippines. And then lastly, to explain the importance of implementing policies of taxation for the economy and government of our country. And for our discussion proper, let us begin with the definition of taxation and tax. So when we say taxation, maraming ways para ma-define siya, pero para mas madaling maintindihan, sinasabi lang na yung taxation is the practice or yung process na ginagawa ng government kung saan nagko-collect sila ng tax or in Tagalog, yung tinatawag natin na buwis. And yung tax na yon, based on the definition here, it is mandatory for all except sa mga minimum wage earners. And yung perang nalilikom ng government, ang siya namang ginagamit sa mga expenses ng bansa, katulad halimbawa ng infrastructures and other public expenditures. And now, let's move on to the purpose and significance of tax. So, ayan, sabi dito, ang primary purpose talaga ng tax is to generate funds or revenues used to defray expenses incurred by the government in promoting the general welfare of its citizenry. So ayun, katulad nga ng nasabi ko kanina, yung perang nakokolekta galing sa buwis or yung mga perang nakokolekta sa mga mamamayang Pilipino ang ginagamit para makapag-raise ng funds na ginagamit ng government for the betterment of our country. And aside from that, ang isa pa nitong purpose is to equitably contribute to the wealth of the nation. And then, next naman is yung history of tax. So, even before pa tayo makolonize ng ibang bansa, meron ng sistema ang Pilipinas sa kung paano nagbabayad ng tax ang mga tao. Una na rito, yung tinatawag na buwis. Yung paraan ng pagbabayad nito can be in the form of cash or kind. When we say kind, ito yung form of payment kung saan imbes na pera, goods or services yung pinag-provide nila. And yung pangalawa naman is tinatawag na bandala system, which is derived from the Tagalog word mandala. Dito naman, obligado yung mga magsasakang Pilipino na ibenta sa gobyerno yung mga products na naaaning nila sa pinakamurang halaga in exchange sa hindi nila pagbabayad ng tax. And ayun, habang lumilipas yung panahon, nagde-develop and nag-evolve din yung taxation sa Pilipinas. And since yung country nga natin is na-colonize ng iba't ibang bansa, naapektuhan nito halos lahat ng aspect na meron tayo, including yung taxation. And sa mga susunod pong reporters, i-discuss nila yung taxation under different colonial experiences. Ayan po yung nakapresent. Taxation under Spanish, taxation under Americans, taxation during the Commonwealth period, and lastly, taxation under the fiscal policy from 1946 to present. And here we have Miss Fortuna to discuss taxation under Spanish.
Hello, good day. I'm Isa, and allow me to continue this discussion. So, after the Philippines was discovered, founded, settled by the Spaniards, the Spanish government somehow, in some ways, owned the Philippines the land, the water, the services, and the people, of course. And due to the lack of knowledge of Filipinos, they were forced into certain things that benefited the Spaniards. Una na doon ay ang pagbibigay ng tributos. Tributos or tributes or compulsory monetary payment of around 8 to 12 reals. So 8 reals is equal to 1 peso. And it was one of the first kind of tax in the Philippines, wherein Filipinos give portion of the money they earned sa mga tax collector. And then the tax collector used a certain amount to develop and improve the island, the Philippines, or a certain place, number one, to provide salary for the government officials and for the expense of clergy. So clergy is the body of church officials. we know how important the Christianity is in terms of the Spanish colonial period. So moving forward, years after, Philippines had development in the agricultural sector, and Spanish government decided to modify the taxation system. So half of the tributos are cash, half naman ay mga galing sa produces. It could be grains, crops, coconuts, sugar canes, and other agricultural products they can provide with value. In this way, hindi na kailangan bumili ng mga Spaniards sa mga Pilipino. Then, on 16th century, uh, there's this Manila-Acapulco trade, the galleon trade, or otherwise known as Lanao de China, wherein the Philippines became the port of trading between countries in Europe and Asia. Countries like China, Japan, Moluccas, Siam, India, Cambodia, and Borneo. So Manila as the port and center became the center of commerce. Well, the location of the Philippines is in the mid of body of water and islands of, let's say, rich nations. Kaya sa Pilipinas sila dumadaong yung mga barko at dinadala yung mga products and commodities for trade. Unfortunately, because of these developments, nagkaroon ng forced labor or the polo is serbisyo, wherein the males are obligated to serve, resulting to overwork, poor health, and deaths in the 17th century. They are required to work 40 days every year, 40 consecutive days every year to build schools, churches, bridges, for the amount of 50 cents or less. And sometimes nothing in exchange, hindi sila binabayaran. So that's how unfortunate life was before. Then, on 1884, the payment of tribute was put to a stop because of the cedula. So, cedula is an identification card and residence tax certificate containing the information of a Filipino as a taxpayer. And take note that taxation in the Philippines during Spanish colonial period was a heavy burden sa mga mamamayan. Malaki yung kinukuha ng mga Spaniards sa kinikita ng mga Pilipino. So these events opened the eyes of the Filipinos, which started the revolutions. Now let's sail forward to the taxation under the American colonial period. So it was 1898 when the Spain gave up its territorial claim on the Philippines to the United States in exchange of the $20 million. Sounds familiar? Yes, that is the Treaty of Paris. Doon nag-start ang American colonization here in the Philippines. Kung ang focus ng Spain ay Christianity, sa Amerika naman ay government. They want to make the economy self-sufficient by running the government with the possible some revenue and create surplus in the budget. So surplus in this way is the excess or the higher level of income over expenditures. And to do that, Americans still followed the Spanish taxation with several modifications. Nandito pa rin si cedula pero nadagdagan na ng iba't ibang mga taxation systems sa mga products and services. So, from 1898 to 1901, Philippines was governed by the American military governors. And under nito, pumapasok ang urbana, or the tax on real estate, later declared as the land tax, kung saan yung mga may-ari ng lupa ay nagbabayad ng certain amount or portion as tax dun sa lupa nila. Pero, ang problema lang is the land tilting in rural areas. As discussed last time, merong mga land reforms kung saan yung mga lupa ay binibigyan ng portion yung mga manggagawa. Same thing here in the land tilting, where in the land reforms or private individuals or family are given formal property rights para sa land that they serve or work for. Ngayon, ang naging solution, it was under the civil government of Sir Luke E. Wright. Nagkaroon ng Internal Revenue Law of 1904. It codifies all tax provisions. It was passed as a reaction to the problem of collecting land tax. It prescribed 10 major sources of revenue. First, taxes on firms dealing in alcoholic beverages and tobacco, and taxes on alcoholic beverages and tobacco products. Next, taxes on banks and bankers. Then, document stamp taxes. 5, of course, the cedula. 6, taxes on insurance and insurance company. 7, taxes on forest products. 8, mining concessions. 9, taxes on business and manufacturing companies. And 10, occupational licenses. Kaakibat ng Internal Revenue of Law ay ang paggawa or pagbuo ng BIR or the Bureau of Internal Revenue na siyang nag-handle ng mga revenue provisions and taxations. So, next we have other type of taxation systems na nabuo under the American colonial period. 1907, naging doble yung fee for the cedula para sa construction and maintenance of roads. So the industrial tax was levied on the business community according to their profitability. Nakadepende dun sa mga community areas. Then, on 1913, the Underwood-Simon Tariff Act was passed, resulting in reduction in the revenue of the government as export taxes levied on sugar, tobacco, hemp, and copra. Ito naman yung mga sa tariff acts. Next, on 1914, nagkaroon ng income tax. So, this is the tax imposed on income-generating business and individuals with respect sa mga revenue or profit that they earned. Next, noong 1919 din, nabuo ang inheritance tax. Ito yung tax na pinapataw sa mga asset ng namatay para sa ibibigay na dun sa mga natira niyang pamilya, ganun. And then 1932 National Lottery, kung saan nagkaroon na ng tax yung mga lottery winners o yung mga napanalo ng amount ng mga lottery winners. So, nagkaroon ng iba't ibang klaseng tax systems dito sa Philippines. But unfortunately, however, these new creations were not enough to increase government revenue. So that's all para sa taxation under the American colonial period.
Sa Commonwealth period naman, ito yung era na may 10 years transitional period sa Philippine history from 1935 to 1945. Ito yung preparation nila for independence from the United States. And the taxation during the Commonwealth period is this. Cedula tax was abolished in 1937, which prepared to be progressive move. So, yung mga cedula tax is inabolish siya noong 1937, pero noong 1940, yung residence tax naman is inimposed sa mga citizens age 18 years old, and pati ganun rin sa may mga corporation. Next, in 1939, the Commonwealth drafted the National Internal Revenue Code, introducing major changes in the new tax system as follows. Yung una is the normal tax of 3% and the surtax on income was replaced by a single tax and progressive rate. Normal tax and surtax was replaced by single tax and progressive rate. So, napalitan yung normal tax and surtax ng single tax and progressive tax. Pag sinabing single tax, ito yung nag-iisang source ng government revenues which intended na palitan lahat ng existing taxes. And pag progressive rate naman, according sa Investopedia, it refers to the tax rate that increases as taxable income increases. So, ibig sabihin, kapag mababa ang income, mababa rin ang tax rate. At kung high ang income mo, mataas rin ang tax rate. Next is the personal exemption were reduced. Personal exemption means it can reduce your taxable income, but it was reduced. So meaning you qualify for the same exemption. The number of exemptions you can claim, it depends on your filing status and the numbers of dependents you have. Dito naman sa number 4, yung mga luxuries is mayroon na ring single turnover tax of 10%, and yung pang-fifth is meron na ring mga taxes sa mga liquor, cigarettes, forestry products, and mining is tumaas na rin. And yung last is dividends were made taxable. So yung mga dividends like yung sum of money na dinidistribute ng corporation sa mga shareholder is taxable na rin. So, the introduced tax structure was an improvement of the earlier system introduced by the Americans, but still remain unequitable or unfair. As World War II reached the Philippines or nakarating na sa Pilipinas, sa lupain ng Pilipinas ang World War II, lahat ng mga economic activity is tinigil nila and dito na nag-start yung pagbaon ng Philippines sa new administrator which is yung Japanese. Lastly, the expenditure or yung mga bayarin ng Japanese military government is lumaki na rin and they issued military notes para lang makover nila yung cost ng war. Sa fiscal policy naman, according ulit sa Investopedia, fiscal policy refers to the use of government spending and tax policies to influence economic conditions. So, it refers to macro and microeconomic conditions. So, for example, mga demand for goods and services, employment, inflation, and economic growth. So, unang-una dito si Rojas. Under ni Rojas, mula 1946 to 1948, he rejected the advice of the United States in tax collection. So, yun nga yung pinropose kanina, he rejected it. And kay Elpidio Quirino regime naman is from 1948 to 1953, yung strength or force ng economic growth is achieved lang through the implementation of import and exchange control that led to import substitution development. Pag sinabing import substitution development, ito yung economic theory na kung saan yung mga developing countries gusto nila ma-less yung pagiging dependent nila sa developed countries. Tapos, dito rin sa under ni Quirino, yung tax revenue is increased twofold compared doon sa kay Rojas regime. And dito naman, under ni Magsaysay Garcia and Macapagal regime, mula 1953 to 1965, they promised to study the tax structure and policy of the country through the creation of Tax Commission in 1959. So, ayan, nag-promise sila na aralin nila yung tax structure and yung policy ng country. And dito rin, sa period na to, yung period of post-war republic, they saw a rise in corruption. So, dito yung may nakita na pagtaas pagdating sa corruption. And dito rin yung mga indirect taxation still contributed to 3/4 of tax revenues. Omnibus Tax Law of 1969 did not increase the ratio of income tax to general tax. So, yung indirect taxation, ibig sabihin yung mga tax pagdating sa mga goods and services rather than on an individual.
So hello, good morning everyone. Before anything else, let me introduce myself first. So I am John Gaston and I will be going to further discuss to you the fiscal policy from 1946 to the present. And now, let's continue on the former President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. regime year 1965 to 1986. So during the latter part of Marcos's years, year 1981 to 1985, the tax system was still heavily dependent on the indirect taxes, which made up to 70% of the total tax collection. So under Marcos regime, nakadepende pa din ang tax system natin sa mga indirect taxes. So take note of the difference between direct and indirect taxes here in the Philippines. So kapag direct tax, this is the one that the taxpayer pays directly to the government. So by the word itself, direct, meaning direct sa gobyerno ang bayad. Ang example of this is the income tax, corporate tax, the capital gains tax, and the property tax. While on the other hand, indirect taxes are totally opposite and are paid to the government if one make any purchases of goods and services. So actually, one great example of indirect tax is the value added tax or VAT. Pero I am going to further discuss this later under Cory Aquino's regime since hindi pa nai-implement ang VAT sa panahon ni Marcos. So to sum everything up, sa panahon ni Marcos, 70% ng tax collection ay sa mga indirect taxes, nakukuha. So next, still under Marcos regime, the taxes grew at an average annual rate of 15% and generated a low tax yield. So annually or every year, tumataas ng 15% ang rate ng taxes na binabayaran ng taxpayers noong panahon ni Marcos. But still, it actually generated a low tax yield. So what do we mean by that ba? So low tax yield refers to a situation kung saan ang government generates relatively little revenue mula sa mga taxation efforts compared sa potential or expected revenue. Now, let's move on to the former President Cory Aquino's regime, year 1986 to 1992. A major reform in the tax system introduced under the term Aquino was the introduction of the value-added tax or VAT. So, ayun nga, as I mentioned it a while ago, si Cory Aquino ang nag-implement ng value-added tax here in the Philippines. She reformed the tax system through the 1986 Tax Reform Program. The VAT law was signed in 1986 and put to effect in 1988. So, as defined in the official website of the Bureau of Internal Revenue or BIR, value-added tax or VAT is a form of sales tax. It is a tax on consumption levied on the sale, barter, exchange, or lease of goods or properties in the Philippines and on importation of goods into the Philippines. So if you can notice, the VAT implemented in Cory Aquino's regime is just for sale of goods but not for services. And that is because it is broadened by the former President Ramos in his CTRP or Comprehensive Tax Reform Program, which will be further discussed later in his regime. So to put it simply, an example of VAT is yung mga binabayaran natin when we do purchase sa mga supermarket, malls, grocery, and such. So if you do have a receipt, you can look it up there. And as of today, 12% ang VAT na binabayaran natin. So now we know na kahit bata pa lang tayo noon, we do pay taxes na, and that is in the form of VAT or the value-added tax. Now, still under Cory's regime, the tax reform of Aquino administration, both tax and revenue effort rose, increasing from 10.7% to 15.4% in 1992. So if in Marcos administration, we generated a low tax yield, in the Cory's administration, the taxation and revenue effort grew for exactly 4.7% in just 1992. So we can say that the introduction of VAT does actually have an impact to our tax system here in the Philippines. So now let's go to the former President Fidel P. Ramos's regime in the year 1992 to 1998. So the Ramos administration ventured into its own tax reform program in 1997 through the Comprehensive Tax Reform Program or the CTRP. It is considered to be a pro-poor and pro-progress. The CTRP is made up of the measures which generate additional revenues by broadening the tax base by capturing undeclared revenues and hidden taxpayers, removing the areas of discretion which provide avenues for tax avoidance and abuse. So to further understand the CTRP or the Comprehensive Tax Reform Program of Ramos, here are the reason and the purpose why it is implemented too. First, it makes the tax system broad-based, simple, and with reasonable tax rates. So yun nga, as I mentioned a while ago, the CTRP generated additional or higher revenue, and that is because it broadened the tax system, which now includes yung mga hidden or mga nakatagong taxpayers na tinatawag, and also tinatanggal nito yung mga discretion, which naglilid kasi yon sa mga avoidance sa pagbabayad ng tama at sapat na halaga ng tax o buwis. Second, minimizes the tax avoidance allowance by existing flaws and loopholes in the system. Since our tax system is not polished enough, it is certainly do have flaws and loopholes pa which ginagamit ng iba as their advantage to avoid paying taxes, which is technically illegal. So that is why Ramos decided to implement the CTRP. Third, it encourages the payment by increasing tax exemption levels, lowering the highest tax rates, simplifying procedure. So again, as mentioned a while ago, the CTRP is considered to be a pro-poor. That's why it increases the tax exemptions to provide relief to lower income individuals here in the Philippines. Lastly, it rationalized the grant of tax incentives, which was estimated to be 531.7 billion pesos in 1994. So Ramos aimed to stimulate specific behavior or activities that he considered beneficial for the economy or society. That is why tax incentive is rationalized. So next, still under Ramos regime, the VAT base was broadened in 1997 to include services through Republic Act 7716. Like I mentioned a while ago, Cory Aquino is the one introduced and implemented the value-added tax for sales, barter, exchange of goods, but under Ramos regime, he broadened the VAT which now includes the services, and that is through the RA 7716. Next up is the Estrada regime year 1998 to 2000. Since the succeeding term of the former President Joseph Estrada in 1998 was too short to constitute in any changes in the tax system. Let's now move forward to Gloria Macapagal Arroyo's regime year 2000 to 2010. She undertook increased government spending without adjusting tax collection. So she grew up the government spending or ang pagwaldas ng gobyerno, though she doesn't adjust the tax collection. In 2005, the expanded value-added tax or EVAT was signed into law as Republic Act 9337. So again, take note of the difference between VAT and EVAT. The expanded value-added tax or EVAT is a type of VAT or value-added tax system that includes a broader range of goods and services compared to a standard VAT. It often involves applying the tax to a wider array of transactions which can contribute to increased government revenue. So the main purpose why Arroyo implemented the EVAT is that to increase the revenue of the government, but again, not adjusting the tax collection in her administration. In February 2006, the VAT tax rate was also increased from 10% to 12%. So back when Cory Aquino implemented the VAT, it is just 10%, but in Arroyo regime, she increased it for 2%, making it 12%, which is actually still the rate of VAT as of the moment, year 2023. So let's now move on to another Aquino's regime, which is the former President Benigno Aquino III's regime year 2010 to 2016. The administration ventured into the adjustment of excise tax on liquor and cigarette, or the sin tax reform made law by the Republic Act 1035. So according to Rappler's News, year 2012, on December 20, President Benigno Aquino III signed the sin tax bill into the law, ending a grueling battle to reform the Philippines' excise tax system. He said that, "Today, we sign finally a law that serves as an early Christmas gift to millions of Filipinos who will be covered by the Universal Health Care Program, who will benefit from new public clinics and hospitals that will be built, and who will be discouraged from smoking and drinking," the President said in his speech at the signing ceremony in Malacanang Palace. So clearly, his purpose on adjusting the excise tax is to discourage people from smoking and drinking to promote health care program. By implementing this law, it will generate additional revenue of roughly 34 billion pesos in the first year of implementation that will be spent for the Universal Healthcare Program and tobacco farmers' livelihood. Next, still under Noynoy's regime, he allowed increase the budget of the DOH and PhilHealth from 55.2 million in 2012 to 515.4 million in 2015. In his administration, he is focused more on promoting the healthcare program of the Philippines, and one way to do this is to increase the budget of the Department of Health and the PhilHealth in exactly 460.2 million for more or less 3 years. Let's move forward to the former President Rodrigo Roa Duterte's regime, year 2016 to 2022. He supported the implementation of the Tax Reform for Acceleration and Inclusion or TRAIN law. Let's define what is TRAIN law. The Tax Reform for Acceleration and Inclusion or TRAIN, or the Republic Act No. 10963, was signed into law by the President Rodrigo Duterte on December 19, 2017 and implemented on January 1, 2018. The TRAIN law is aimed to generate revenue to achieve the 2022 and 2040 vision of the Duterte administration, namely to eradicate extreme poverty, to create inclusive institutions that will offer equal opportunities to all, and to achieve higher income country status. So Duterte wants to clear out the problem in terms of the poverty by implementing the TRAIN law in the Philippines tax system. So the proposal of the TRAIN law in the Philippines is that majority of the taxpayer will receive further personal income tax cuts beginning January 1, 2023, pursuant to the Republic Act 1096-3 or the Tax Reform for Acceleration and Inclusion Train Law, which among others adjusted personal income tax rates to make the tax system simpler, fairer, and more efficient. So next, Duterte vowed to lower income tax rates and shouldered by working Filipinos. So just like any other president, Duterte wants to help lower income individuals in the Philippines by lowering tax rates that they need to be paid by working Filipino taxpayers. So last, under Duterte regime, the proposed tax reform also seeks to limit VAT exemptions and increase excise tax on petroleum products and automobiles. If the former President Benigno Aquino III increased the excise tax for liquor and cigarettes, former President Rodrigo Duterte and his administration seeks to increase the excise tax on petroleum products and automobiles. So now, after discussing the changes in the tax system under the former President of the Philippines from the year 1946 to 2022, let's shortly tackle about the changes in the tax system in the another Marcos, which is the current President of the Philippines, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. in the year 2022 to present. According to Rappler's News last April 2023, the President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s economic team sees higher revenue as the government gears up to slap more taxes on sweet beverages, single-use plastics, and mining. In Manila, Philippines, the Marcos administration is anticipating an increase in revenues due to higher taxes from passive income, online streaming services, single-use plastics, and premixed alcohol, among others. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. economic team is set to pick up Duterte's proposed Passive Income and Financial Intermediary Taxation Act, which is expected to yield 25 billion pesos. According to the Finance Secretary Benjamin Jokno, he said they also keen on adding 3 more tax reform measures such as excise tax on sweetened beverages, motor vehicle road users tax, and a mining fiscal regime. The government is expecting 53 billion from excise taxes on sweetened beverages and 15.8 billion from motor vehicle road users tax. As for the mining tax reform, it expects 12 billion pesos in the first year of implementation. So, in conclusion, the history of taxation is a complex narrative marked by the evolving systems, from Levi's supporting precedent to the modern progressive taxation. Taxes have funded the Philippine governments and shaped the economies of the country. It is important to study tax not just as a student but as a citizens of the Philippines. So that would be all for the report of Group 8. Thank you very much everyone for watching this video.